During this project, you'll create an original edition of Linocut proofs utilizing a crawl-level design-make process. Printmaking and the concept of multiple originals offers versatility, experimentation, and allows artists to become very prolific with their work. I hope you enjoy this process. Let's get started. During this project, you're going to create an original edition of relief prints using a crawl-level design-make process. We'll develop an appreciation for multiple originals created through the process, fine motor skills, and compositional considerations. We'll combine technology concepts with classical media and apply proper use of printmaking materials. I'll cover the materials needed for the digital print, transfer materials, and printmaking materials. For your prep and print, if you have Photoshop available, you can use that. If you don't, you can use Photopea. It's a browser-based application and anyone can access it. I'll cover transferring the image in a demo for cutting the block, pulling the prints, and when you're finished, you'll have an edition of multiple originals. Make sure you choose an image that posterizes or filters to your liking. You can make adjustments to that image, but make sure that the photograph that you use for the project suits your liking. Use tape and press hard when you transfer. There are multiple ways to create relief prints. This is just one. And keep the lino block clean. Let's get started. We're going to do our digital prep either using Photoshop or Photopea. The process that you use will be the same in both applications, but just know in Photoshop you'll have filters that aren't available to you in Photopea. Photopea is a free browser-based application. It works on a Chromebook, a PC, or a Mac, and anybody can access it through photopea.com. I'll show you both processes using Photoshop though. So to start, we'll go to File, Open, select your image, hit Open again, and your image will pop up. Make sure you have black on your palette on top. We'll go back up to Image, Autotone, Image, Auto Contrast, and then one more time back to Image Adjustments to put our threshold. If you're using Photopea, you'll use Threshold. In Photoshop, you will have the option of using some filters, and we'll go over that here in a second. You can make adjustments to your threshold to your liking. When you're happy, hit OK, and you'll be ready to print. For filters, we'll go to Filter, Filter Gallery. And the filter I like to use is Stamp. You can find that underneath the Sketch folder. So go to Sketch, Stamp, and you can make adjustments to the smoothness or the lightness or darkness. When you transfer, we're using this image as a reference, so you can make adjustments after you transfer. Just make sure that the image is similar to what your prints need to look like when you're finished. When you're happy with the image, click OK. And now we're going to add some text. Switch your palette to white. Click the text tool, and I'm using a 600 point font. By default, Photoshop goes up to, I believe, 72, but you can type in a larger number. I'm going to go ahead and type in some text to add in the negative space above my image. I'll adjust the size a little bit. And since that text is on a separate layer, I'm going to have to combine those two layers. So I'll do that down in my Layers panel. Hold Shift, click the background layer, and then go up to Layer and Merge Layers. The last thing that I need to prep with my image is to actually flip it horizontal. If I were to transfer the image as it is printed, when I pull my proofs, the image will actually be in reverse. So I need to go up to Image, Flip Canvas Horizontal, and I'm ready to save it and print it. Now that we have our image prepped, it's time to transfer the image to the wood block. The materials we'll need are lino, in this case fixed to a wood block, or you could use roll linoleum. The advantage of using roll linoleum is that you can cut it down to any size that you want. Both can be found online. Obviously your digital image, and I like to have a reference image of the original picture, just in case I want to add some detail to it. Some tape, a ballpoint pen, a soft pencil, and an eraser. We'll start the transfer process by adding graphite to the back of our image. Pay close attention to areas you know you're going to transfer, and it's good practice to cover the whole back of the sheet and make sure you add graphite in different directions. Once you feel you have enough graphite on the back of the image, check to make sure by flipping it a couple of times. And now let's start adding line work. Line your image up to the block. Add a piece of tape. I like to create a flap on the tape by folding over the edge. It makes it a little easier to take the image off after you transfer it. By adding tape and securing your image, it'll allow you to register the image, as we need to check every once in a while to make sure that the lines are transferring to our liking. Start in any area that you want and trace as much detail as you can. It's always best to transfer more lines than you think you need, because we can always erase those later or make adjustments. Be sure that you're pressing heavy enough to transfer the lines, and check to make sure that those lines are transferring every once in a while. When you think you have all of the lines transferred, lift off your transfer paper, check the image, and make any adjustments that you feel you need to with the eraser. And it's always good practice to recheck and check again to make sure you have all the lines that you need. In this case, I noticed that I'm missing one crucial element to my image, so I went back in and added it. Check a few more times, and when you're happy with your line work, tape your original image to the back of your transfer paper. That way you won't get graphite all over your work. And now it's time to start cutting. Now that we've transferred our line work to our block, it's time to start cutting. We'll be using various gouges and a test strip so that we can practice making cuts. Just take a piece of scrap linoleum, draw some shapes on it, and you'll be able to use that as a test strip. The various types of gouges that we'll be using are V gouges. V gouges are used to create line work. and cut thin lines to define areas that you want to gouge out later on. U-gouges, which can create thicker lines, or you can use those to cut out areas as well. There are square gouges that allow us to clean the lino up with anything that we want off of the lino when we're finished, and those can be used to plane out areas as well. And we can also use a knife tip gouge to define areas that we need to cut with more definition. To use a gouge, rest the large part or the back of the gouge in your palm and use your index finger to steady the front of the gouge. It's good practice to use a bench hook if you haven't ever cut before. But in this case, I'll be using my test strip just to make some simple cuts. Resting the gouge in my palm, locking in my wrist and elbow, I'm just leaning forward at a slight angle to cut this line work. I suggest making as many lines as possible so that you can get comfortable with this. Never allowing your non-cutting hand to be in front of the gouge or you will get cut. If the gouge is cutting too deep, just adjust by holding the gouge closer to the table. And again, cut various shapes just so you can practice cutting with your non-cutting hand being behind the gouge. It does take some time and some practice to get used to cutting linoleum. But again, the more practice you take with a scrap sheet, the better off you'll be when you commit to your artwork. When you're finished cutting with your V-gouge, I suggest grabbing a U-gouge and going around your work just to practice planing off those larger areas. If you're having problems cutting with the larger U-gouges, just wiggle the gouge a little bit to get it going, remembering to keep your non-cutting hand behind the gouge itself. When you're ready to start cutting, make sure you keep referring to your original image. In this case, I'm going to go in with a V-gouge and just start cutting out the thin lines that define areas that I want to be white. Remember, everything that I cut out with my gouges is going to end up taking on the color of the paper. In my case, I'm using white paper, and I'm going to roll my block up with black. I'll first define all of those areas that I need to remove with a V-gouge and progress through the U-gouges until I have all of that negative space relieved when I'm ready to print. Now that we have the block cut, it's time to start pulling proofs. Check your block to make sure it's clean. Brush it down with a drafting brush or a damp cloth. Little pieces of linoleum can end up with little spots on your proofs, so make sure you check to ensure the surface is clean. I'm going to use water-based ink, a brayer or roller, a palette knife, a Baron, or another object to burnish like a wooden spoon or plastic spoon. You might want to use your bench hook as an inking tray, or if you have inking trays or plexiglass, that will work as well. And it's very important to have a sponge to clean your block off when you're finished printing for subsequent runs. I also need an assortment of paper. I would experiment with different types of paper, different colors, and different surface qualities. Papers with heavy tooth are hard to print with relief printing unless you have a press, but I always encourage people to experiment. Now it's time to charge the block. When you open the ink, please make sure you stir it well. Take your palette knife and mix it up as best you can. Ink tends to separate over time. And when you're ready to start printing, take some ink and spread it in a line across the top of your inking tray. Take a little extra for reserve and place it above that inking line. And now we're ready to charge the brayer. Make sure the brayer is clean and start rolling up. You should hear a tacky sound when you're rolling the brayer. Roll in different directions. If you don't hear a tacky sound, there's a chance you have too much ink on the brayer. And to take care of that, you can just roll it on a scrap sheet of paper to remove some of the ink. If you hear a very high tacky sound, there's probably not enough ink and you'll need to keep charging it. Check your brayer for even distribution and then begin rolling up your block. To roll up your block, try to roll it up evenly. It will take several passes, and make sure you roll it in different directions to ensure even coverage. I like to take one last pass once I think I have enough ink on the block, just to even out the ink a little bit. Once you feel it's charged correctly, it's time to burnish. Take a sheet of paper, and I like to hold the ends of it, bend it almost in half, and try to register it or line it up with the middle of the block. Push it into the block a little bit with your hand, starting in the middle and working outward. And then take a baren, a wooden spoon or plastic spoon, or another object to start to burnish the paper into the block. I like to work in a circular motion, working from the inside out. With some papers, you'll actually be able to see the image start to pop through the back of the paper as it soaks into the paper's fibers. Heavier paper won't allow you to do this, and it's best to use a press if you're using heavier paper. But again, I always encourage people to experiment. One trick that I like to use when I'm pulling proofs is to lift the paper halfway off the block very, very slowly to check to see if I'm getting even coverage. In this case, I have a little dot underneath the R. That's because there must be a little piece of linoleum on the block. You could just take a pin and remove that and re-roll the block. Put the sheet right back down on top of the block and re-burnish, and that would take care of that. Also look for light areas in your print. If you have light corners, perhaps you need to re-roll the block. But just know the first proof that you pull off of any block is customarily a little bit lighter. Once the block is recharged, they tend to print a little bit better. So I could put that back down, re-burnish it. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and pull it, recharge the block, and continue to print. Now it's time for a different color. We'll reload the brayer. Again, rolling in different directions. Check it, then reload the block. One final pass once it's charged. Take your sheet of paper, hold the edges, bend it, and push it into the block from the middle outward with your hand, and then burnish. Remember to work in circular motion, working from the inside out. And again, when you pull your proof, pull it very, very slowly. If you pull it off the block too fast, it can create texture from the ink and give you an unpleasant look to the surface quality of the print. The tooth on this paper left the image a little bit grainy, but rather than putting registration marks on it and re-rolling it, I'm going to leave this one be. And I will go through the process quite a few more times. I like to run editions of 10 or 20 with Linocuts the first time around. Any image that's left over that's different that I'd like to experiment with or save, I'll just label as AP for artist proof. Now that we've pulled our proofs and let them dry, it's time to sign them. Make sure you use a pencil. Put the title in the lower left-hand corner. In this case, I've titled mine R2 in quotations. The edition number, in this case 3 out of 10 in the middle, or A period P period if you're going to consider it an artist proof. If it's different than the edition run, label it A period P period. And make sure you sign it in the lower right hand corner. The concept behind having an edition is that each proof is similar to those in the edition. That is, if I were to run off a copy out of a copy machine of the image, all of those copies would be the same. If I would have 10 copies, I would go ahead and consider that an edition and label those 1 out of 10, 2 out of 10, 3 out of 10, so on and so forth. In this case, this proof is labeled 3 out of 10. There were 10 of these. They all looked exactly the same, and this is the third one in that edition. I hope you enjoyed this crawl level project, and I hope it gives you some confidence to move into my walk and run projects demonstrated in other tutorials. Remember to hit like and subscribe below, and see you next time.